When you're painting in this class, you're going to be using acrylic paints rather than oil paints. Acrylics are a water-based product, which means that you can thin them with water and you can clean your brushes with water as well. Acrylic paints dry darker than they look wet. So when you mix a color and you're trying to match something, you always want to mix it like a half step or a step lighter than you think you need. When you're mixing colors, typically what will happen is that there will be one color in a pair that will be more powerful than the other. So if I was mixing a green, green is a secondary color that's made with the combination of two primaries, yellow and blue. You might think that you would take 50% yellow and 50% blue, but if you do that, you're going to end up with a really, 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 really dark color that is more blue than it is green. And that's because blue is so much stronger than yellow. So what you'll do is you'll pull some of your yellow first. And you can use a brush for this, or you can use a palette knife to mix your paint. It's really up to you. It's generally better to use a palette knife, but you guys are going to be making pretty small batches of paint, and so a brush will work just fine. So if I use this much yellow, I might take, you know, gosh, just a tiny bit of the blue and mix it in. So look at that. Look how powerful that blue is compared to the yellow. So you want, when you're mixing a green, you just want it to sit visually right in between yellow and blue. You don't want it to look too yellow. You don't want it to look too blue. The kinds of yellows and blues that you use to mix your color is going to affect the kind of green that you get. So don't worry, you know, too much about that. You just want to look at it and say that's definitely green. It's not blue green and it's not yellow green. So this looks pretty good for my you know, initial mix of the secondary color. Now, handling acrylic paint, it dries pretty quickly. So you want to make sure that you're keeping things kind of juicy. So you can always dip your brush in water periodically. It's a really good thing to do just to keep things moving, but you don't want too much water on there that things become transparent. When you are laying down paint on your paper, so this is palette paper that I'm using here to mix my color. When you lay down the paint on your paper, you want things to be fairly smooth, to lay down pretty nicely. Now this paint is pretty transparent, so you can see as I brush it, I can still see some of that paper underneath. Now for your color wheel, it's not going to really matter. It's okay if some paper shows through. But for your portrait painting, you don't want any color to show through. So if I was painting this green on my color portrait, it might take me like 2 or even 3 passes. So some colors are just more opaque than others. Also, certain brands of paint are more opaque than others. This is like the worst paint ever, Liquitex Basics. I hate it, but that's what I have in my space today. So when you work with a cheap paint, you have to do more coats. If you're working with a nicer quality of paint, it's going to be a lot less work. But just know, sometimes you need more coats. As you're painting, keep in mind you don't want to keep scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing your paint. You want to lay down a nice smooth coat, let it dry, and then come back to it. So if you keep agitating the paint while it's drying, it's going to give you a really gross finish, and you're going to end up with kind of a light spot in the middle and then a dark ring around it. So lay down a nice smooth coat, let it dry, then if you need to do a second coat, that's totally fine. You want your paint to come down nice and smooth. You don't want like big glops, right, or ridges of paint. So you don't want that. You want it to be nice and smooth. If you run into this problem where you have a lot of streakiness, after this dries, I can come on top of it in another direction, almost like a crosshatch pattern, and that's going to help me with my streakiness. And then if I had to do a third coat, I could come back in this direction. I could even do a diagonal. You just want it to be kind of as flat and opaque as possible. So keep in mind, as you are doing your color wheel, if you are mixing a green, you're going to need much more yellow than you are blue. You're going to need, if you're mixing an orange, much more yellow than you are red. And if you're mixing a violet, I think I had you guys buy a violet, but if you're mixing your own violet, it's pretty much 50-50. But if you're mixing your own, violet is one of those colors that it's really hard to mix something that looks truly like grapey, violety. It's better to work with purple that comes right out of the tube. But if you have to mix, mix your own, it's no big deal. Your purple's going to turn out better if you have a cooler red and a cooler blue. So like an alizarin crimson as opposed to a cadmium red, and like an ultramarine blue as opposed to a phthalo blue. But again, it's not the end of the world. You're just going to do the best you can. Sometimes with darker colors like a purple, you have to, or a violet, you have to mix a little bit of white in with it. Just the tiniest bit, so that you can see the color, because violet is so dark that sometimes it's hard to get a good read for what's happening. Okay, so that's basic paint handling with acrylic paint. Remember to keep your brushes in water, and anytime you have a color change, so let's see if I can get this to show up on camera. So I've got this kind of green mucky water. If I use this water to keep my brush moving after I've changed colors, like let's say I want to, make a red or an orange next, I want to change my water. So your water should be the color that you're working in or totally clear. So get in the habit of changing it pretty frequently. And then when you wash your brushes, make sure that you are getting the paint out of them. They might stain the bristles a little bit. You don't really need to worry about that. But you want to make sure that there are no big chunks of paint in what's called the ferrule. So this is called the ferrule. This is this metal piece that holds the bristles in. And oftentimes, if you're not good about cleaning, you'll get tons of paint caught right up in here, and that's going to ruin your brush faster than anything. So make sure that you're cleaning them really well.